Welcome to Typecasting.
Pop culture by the numbers. That is your host, Lucas Graydon, who is infinitely better than Bucky in every way.
Oh, I'm honored. And that's your host, Murjanatu and Lucas, whose pure heart makes her a perfect candidate for Project Rebirth.
Oh, wait, that is so much better. Thank you. That is the sweetest thing anyone's ever said. And also, because I don't like Bucky very much, so the bar's not super high. But I was going to be like the Bucky to my Steve, but I like Bucky, but I like you better than Bucky.
That's so funny.
And I like the alliteration. Thank you very much. Well, here on Typecasting, two Enneagram Type 4s, our favorite, are having a spoiler-filled discussion of the best fictional characters and discovering where they fall on the Enneagram of personality.
Now, there are a few ground rules here at Typecasting. So before we get down to business, let's review.
Rule number 1. Every type is beautiful.
Number 2, the Enneagram is a tool, not a box.
Rule number 3, we only type fictional characters. You are the authority on your own type.
Number 4, our favorite, we are not experts.
Yes, I'm so excited to talk today about my very favorite Avenger. He's been with me through childhood, through puberty, and then, of course, through the best part of life, Captain America and his cohorts.
I am so excited for this. Literally one of the best characters. A lot, I think, of some of the, in my opinion, some of my favorite characters in the Marvel Universe. And so let's get started today with the man behind the shield, the name behind it all, Steve Rogers, a.k.a. Captain America, played by the love of my life, Chris Evans, the love of both of our lives.
I know, I was going to say, wait, also the love of my life. And you know, when you were introducing me, I was thinking you were going to say, like, worthy of Chris Evans. Because, you know, it's like, I'm self-conscious about the fact that, like, I don't think I'm good enough for Chris Evans. And I still think that Project Rebirth is probably even a better compliment. But I know we fight over him a lot.
I want you to know that you are worthy of Chris Evans. And Chris, since you're listening to this, and we are the most popular Marvel podcast on Apple Podcasts, please know that Murjanatu is single right now. Even if she's not single in the future, she is ready to mingle with you. So
yes.
Please do reach out. We'll get to our socials at the end of the episode, but just keep that in mind.
I will drop everything and everyone for you, Chris Evans. Oh my gosh, I love it so much. All right.
So Steve does appear in quite a few of the Marvel movies. And just a quick fun fact before we get into our discussion of his Enneagram type is that Chris Evans was Marvel's #1 choice for this role when they were producing the first Avenger way back when. But Chris Evans actually turned down the role of Captain America 3 times. He was too worried about the public attention that it would bring and the impact that it would have on his private life. And it was actually Robert Downey Jr. who talked him in to taking the role so that in the future he could choose whatever roles he wanted because of his fame. And so that he would have more control over his personal and professional life in the future. I thought that was a fun fact.
I didn't know that at all. And I feel like that makes me want to re-pitch my proposal to him. Because if he's like, I love my private life, I'm like, yeah, I don't know who you are. I'm super chill.
Yes, there you go. There we go. Okay.
So if he doesn't reach out because of the podcast and it's just like because fans tell him to reach out to me, like, please tell them that I'm chill. He'll find out later. It'll be fine.
Okay. Before we get underway, we do want to share where we both came down on what we think Captain America's Enneagram type is. So why don't you go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick us off. First of all, listeners, I want to say something just between you and I. Lucas, plug your ears. One of the things that I discovered on our first podcast is that Lucas is smarter than me. And I love it about him.
Wait, sorry, I'm not listening.
the thing is, I realized that he won the argument because he's smarter than me, but I genuinely think I'm right. Like, I was really convincing, but Lucas is you know what I mean? Like, it's like how Hamilton's a better person, but Aaron Burr is a better lawyer. Like, that is what it is here. I don't like being Burr, but in this one situation, I'm the Hamilton of this operation.
Okay, we're going to have that conversation off mic.
But I just want everyone to know that if you back me because I am correct, like, let me know. We don't have to share it with Lucas, but I will, like, know it in my heart. Okay. So now I will begin. So Captain America, like I said, is one of my favorite characters in the entire MCU. Lucas, I will open this up. I think I could be convinced of a couple different numbers on him. I do think overall, and this goes to my theory that I weirdly think everyone is a 1, but I do think he's a 1. He has a fierce love for what is right, for tradition, and for justice. He is fiercely loyal, which isn't necessarily a component of the 1, but the fact that they're perfectionists, they're self-controlled, and they're purposeful. He even notices when other people are being purposeful or self-controlled, and when he doesn't agree with someone, he cannot get off the bandwagon. And so I love that about him. I do think that he probably has a wing too, but I'm not really sure on that. Again, can be convinced of otherwise, but I think of like his basic fear of being corrupt or evil. I mean, are you kidding me? That's like basically what you just said about Chris Evans. And I know they're not the same person, but there's a reason he was the number 1 pick. And then he just wants to be good, to have integrity, and to be balanced. I'm reading this straight from the EnneagramInstitute.org. But I do think that he just has a lot of those beautiful pieces of what makes the ones the best people. And when he's in health, he's like, let's have fun, let's be crazy. He's Bucky's sidekick going on all these adventures in the 7. I mean, he's kind of moody sometimes. He might go to Forge Trust. I can be convinced of otherwise, but I think he is like the best characteristics of a 1.
Fascinating. Okay, I love that. I have so many thoughts, but first I will say my initial guess is a little bit different, and I think that we may be able to come to an agreement here.
Okay.
So I have initially written down that Steve is an 8, the challenger, and I feel pretty strongly that he's an 8. However, the wing I could go back and forth on. I have him right now as an 8 wing 9. And I think that he's an 8 for a lot of the same reasons that you pointed to the 1. Actually, I think his thirst for justice and his innate need to do what's right and his willingness to stand in the face of anybody who he believes is being immoral or unjust totally points to the 8. He will not back down. I'm reminded a lot of in Captain America Civil War, and again, we are a spoiler-filled podcast. Here comes one of our first spoilers of the day. After Peggy dies, which, so sad. And Sharon is giving a eulogy at her funeral, and she talks about planting your feet into the ground when you know that you are right, and no matter who tells you to move, you don't move.
I asked her once how she managed to master diplomacy and espionage in a time when no one wanted to see a woman succeed at either. And she said, compromise where you can. But where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move. It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye, and say no. You move.
And I think that he has almost a bullheadedness to him, and not in a bad way at all, but in a strength of his resolve and his beliefs that he will not let anybody get in the way of what he believes is right, in a way that I think
Ones
turns
also do
to
that.
more 8 than more 1. And part of that for me is I think a really key characteristic of the 1, and I'll attribute what I'm about to talk about to the Sleeping at Last podcast, is actually where I first heard a lot of this about the 1, is that inner voice and that inner critic that I think is always on in the voice of a 1 that I don't think we see a lot of in Steve. Steve has a ton of inner turmoil and a ton of things that are going on in his mind, especially when he becomes the man out of time that he is from Avengers onward. But when we look at just Steve as who he is as a person in like the first Avenger, he's not super conflicted about who he is or if he's good or if he's doing the right thing. He has enough confidence in himself and in his belief in justice that he goes with a different name, a different hometown to every medical exam that he can go to because he knows what's right is to be in the army and to be fighting the war for America and for freedom. And for him, it's not about an inner conflict or an inner critic. It's he externalizes. And I think a lot of his focus is on the external. He says like he doesn't like bullies. And I think that 8s above anything else don't like bullies. They don't like people who punch down. And Steve is never afraid to back down from a challenge in a way that I think he is the best of a lot of 8s.
Yes. I think wherever we land on this, I think he's just like, we just want to give space for 1s and 8s because I think a lot of times both people everyone, when you read your Enneagram, it sounds, the worst one sounds like typically the one that you are. But 8's always like angry, like, well, I don't feel angry. Right. But if you can see like how Captain America uses anger for good and might have like, I love like, I think this is not a Hamilton podcast. I hate to mention them again, but just kind of that idea of never being satisfied. I think that's something that he has. Like if there's nothing good in the world, like if there's always bad in the world, he can never rest. And I think you see that throughout, and it's really hard for him to learn to do that in his arc. And so like I can be okay with the 8. I think he's a little softer than a lot of 8s that I know personally, like when he's in his when he's not in like fighting mode. But I love the fact like, yeah, he's the guy in Brooklyn who wouldn't back down for a fight is one of the things that Bucky says about him.
You ready to follow Captain America into the jaws of death?
Hell no. That little guy from Brooklyn who was too dumb not to run away from a fight. I'm following him.
And he's also like, I do think he has a little bit of that internalized anger that, first of all, he is small, and he has that internal anger that he, after that all his friends are gone and he lost some of the great things. And I think that it's can always pinpoint where that comes from, but I think I could agree. Like, I still like feel like he's a 1, but I also am like, no, I do think like you make a great argument for the 8. And I think that like, some of my very best, I am an 8 attractor. I think you know that, Lucas. Like a lot of my best friends are 8s.
Yes.
And I see like all the best qualities of 8. I think that Steve Rogers absolutely has. And my favorite thing, I want to talk about the flagpole from the first Captain America. Yes. When they were running and forever and ever, and they said like you could stop running if you can get the flagpole, like if you get the flag from top of the flagpole, and all these guys are trying to get up the flagpole and no one can do it, and so he just like dismantles it so that it falls to the ground and he can pick it up. And I was
it's
like,
very
the
Mulan
sass
of him,
yes.
But I love it. And actually, the flagpole, I was just gonna say, I wanted to dig into the wings a little bit. And if we are looking at him as an 8 right now, I had him as a wing 9, but I wasn't super confident in that. But I think the flagpole is a great example of something that might be his 9 wing leading him, where 9s are very good at neutralizing a situation and having a very unbiased perspective and kind of taking a step back and getting out of their own heads long enough to maybe find a different way around a problem. And I think that that's a great example of everyone else just kind of looking at the flagpole and thinking the obvious answer is trying to climb up it and failing, whereas he has the ability to step back and reevaluate the problem and come up with a much simpler but less conventional solution. And I think that may be his 9 wing in that instance.
Yeah, I can see that too. And I think that he also has this side of like, he wants to be the neutralizer. He wants to be the peacemaker. And I think he has some inner turmoil there. I think had he not been reintroduced to Bucky, or had the enemy of Civil War not been Bucky, I don't know if he would have defied the rest of the Avengers so strongly. I think like he kind of wanted to go, like he doesn't want to just make friction. And I also think it was interesting the quote you picked for Peggy, because I want to talk about that when we talk about Peggy. That's not Captain America's quote, but it inspired the 8 in him, and I can see the like, oh, the frustration that always comes with like being an 8-wing 9 or 9-wing 8. We see you guys. We know there's a lot going on in your heads, and we're happy you're here. Okay, speaking of which, so one of the reasons I didn't pick him as an 8 is because I'm going to ruin the surprise. I did think Bucky was like a clear-cut 8. So I want to talk about Bucky, the Winter Soldier. Let me introduce him, and then we can debate. So in the comics, this is kind of interesting. Bucky was actually known as Captain America's kid sidekick. And this was because Marvel came after DC. DC had rampant success, and the Avengers actually weren't super successful. And this is me talking from my own. I have not fact checked this. We're not experts, but the Avengers were definitely not at Marvel's most entertaining property or most successful property. And so a lot of times you'll see very clear parallels between DC Comics and Marvel Comics, where they kind of tried to take what DC had created and created those traditional, wonderful superheroes, but gave them a twist. And I think they did a really great job of doing that. You can see the parallels between Iron Man and Batman. And here, actually, you can see the parallels in the sidekick of Bucky versus Robin, the boy wonder. So let's talk about Bucky, who is very much transformed in the film. Yes. As I preluded earlier, I do not love Bucky, and it is very controversial. Like people do not believe in my expertise about Marvel because I don't like Bucky.
Well, this is funny because I feel like fans of the franchise, and especially the Captain America franchise, can fall on one of two sides. And I think one side is the more rational answer or opinion, and one side is the more like reading what you want to see there.
Yes.
Where I fall very much on the I love Bucky train, but I love Bucky because Steve loves Bucky. If you look at what Bucky does in the movies, which I was doing to prepare for this podcast episode and realizing that Bucky does not do a lot, especially not a lot of his own free will for a lot of like Captain America, the Winter Soldier, even in Civil War. And so I think he's less of a character in his own right than he is in relation to Steve, but I love his and Steve's relationship so much that I think I just take Steve's love for Bucky and give that to myself as well. Whereas I think it's totally valid to watch the movies and be like, what does Bucky do? Like, who is he as a person? I think that's a fair question.
Yeah, and I don't like hate Bucky. I'm just like, wait, what? Who? I mean, you're gonna really do this much for this guy? Like why? I just don't you don't see it as much. And researching this, I think the humble beginnings of their beautiful friendship is really, really sweet. Like the boys from Brooklyn, and one being like kind of a protector of the other, and one being kind of more humble and kind. And I love their dynamic. So I see what you're saying. Like, I love him because Captain America loves him, but like they have done nothing to convince me I should love him. So let's talk about Bucky. I want to hear your thoughts, Lucas.
Yes, so I actually have to say, my first thought, and I'm going to say it right now because then I'm going to change it. My first thought was 2. I think 2 is kind of where I have landed for him.
What?
And I'm very interested to see where you come in with the 8. But my initial idea for the wing was maybe a 3, but I'm actually, I think, going to change over to a 1. I'm very much between the two of them right now, either a 2-wing 3 or a 2-wing 1. And so you've said that you're an 8, but is it all right if I go ahead and talk a little bit more about where I came on the 2?
Of course.
Okay. I'm excited for this debate.
I am so shocked. I don't even know where I'm going to start this debate. So I'm glad you're happy.
So I think it was really important for me when I was trying to figure out Bucky as a character. Like I said, he doesn't get a ton to do. And I think that the one time that we really get to see Bucky as a character without any like external forces impacting his behaviors is in Captain America, the First Avenger. And I think that looking at his and Steve's relationship in that movie is the best indicator that we have of who Bucky at his core is when it comes to finding his type on the Enneagram. And the one thing that really shines out to me most in their relationship is his protective care over Steve. When he saves Steve from the bullies in the alley and then tells Steve that he can't keep getting into these fights, he asks Steve, "Oh, where were you from today? Because you're continuing to lie to these people to try and get into the army, and you keep putting yourself in danger, and I don't want to see you putting yourself in danger." And I see a lot of him stepping into almost a maternal role with Steve. After Steve's mom dies, Bucky is the one who's there for him and the one who continues to take care of him. Not because he thinks Steve can't take care of himself, but because he doesn't want him to have to take care of himself. And so I see a lot of really nurturing love and care over Steve, especially before Steve goes through his transformation and then Bucky later goes through his own transformation as the Winter Soldier. I initially had him as a wing 3 because I think we see him as kind of the suave. He's the ladies' man. He gets their dates to the Stark Expo, and he is the one kind of rising through the ranks of the army. But when I think about one of my favorite exchanges between Bucky and Sam that happens a few different times in the Marvel movies is, "Don't do anything stupid until I get back." And then Steve replies, "How can I? You're taking all the stupid with you."
Don't do anything stupid until I get back.
How can I? I'm taking all the stupid with you.
And for me, that is what kind of switched me over to that wing 1, where Bucky really does care about doing the right thing. He's like, "Steve, stop lying, stop fighting, don't do anything stupid. Kind of stay within those lines and do the right thing on paper. There are things that you can do on paper kind of as the one that just makes sense as doing the right thing." Whereas Steve is very emotional and passionate and wants to do whatever it takes to get to where he sees he can do the most good. And so I think my final answer as of right now is a 2 wing 1, but that's a very recent shift over.
Yeah, I think I love you very much. I think you're reading into it wrong. I feel like every time he's like saying that, it's not from like a protective way. I think he's like tantalizing him a little bit, and I think he's sad for his friend. Like, I don't think he's like trying to protect him by saying like, "Do the right thing." I think he's like, "I know, I want you to be a part of here. I want you to be a part of this too. How can we get you in because you can't do it?" And I don't think he's necessarily saying like, "Don't do that because it's wrong." I think he's just like, "I don't want you to get hurt, dude. You're way smaller than everyone else." So and then once he is strong and big, he's like, "Oh, whoa, I don't know what to do." And I don't think he can find his role. So I could maybe see the 3 where he's very flirty with ladies. I mean, throughout the entire series, he's one of the most sarcastic people. And so I think that's also where you get the like, "Don't be stupid till I'm back." Like, he and Rocket have this like kind of sarcastic discussion, and I think they're like a really funny duo when they're just fighting against the aliens in Infinity War.
How much for the gun?
Not for sale.
Okay, how much for the arm? Oh, I'll get that arm.
But I also just think that Bucky's just overall like, "Don't do anything stupid till I get back." I think he wants to be a part of the stupid. Like, he's like such a fun like wingman guy to be around. He doesn't really strike me as a 1. I don't think he's very observant as a 1, but I could totally see him being like, "I'm just doing the best I can out here. I'm a 3. Right. Like, I'm trying to achieve," like, you know what I mean? But like, not necessarily the healthiest 3, but just like, he's just trying his best. And I originally said an 8 because I think he's the one who's actually fighting the bullies, not because Steve can. It's because Steve physically cannot at that point in the journey. Right. And I don't necessarily think that's like a 1 thing to do. Obviously, like, if I misunderstood, I also don't think he has that self-conscious rhetoric in his mind's eye. So I think that's what gave me the 8. I think his basic fear is definitely like, I don't want to be manipulated. I don't want to be controlled by others. Like, that's an 8's thing. And then that fear becomes actualized, and he's the worst version of himself, which is where I've kind of come to the 8. And they just really want to be in control of their lives and to protect others. And so I feel like he really has the 8. Understanding that we've decided Captain America is an 8, I get a little confused on where I don't think they're both 8s, because I don't think that relationship would work very well. But I mean, I'm just thinking of the multiple times. He's like, "Man, I love this place." He's just like a sarcastic uncle at the table, you know? And I just don't see him being a 1. I don't see that being really his behavior or his sense of humor either. So I don't
right.
know. I don't really fall with the 1. I think I could land with you on the 3 together, but I felt very confident about the 8 coming into this.
Yeah. I think those are great points. My biggest pushback on him being an 8 is that maybe now, like where we find him at the end of Endgame, he probably would say that his biggest fear is being controlled or like not having control over his life. But I don't think that was a fear of his before undergoing everything that he did at the hands of Hydra. And similar to our conversation about Tony being somebody who struggles with anxiety and PTSD, but that not defining his core personality trait because his personality existed before all of that. I feel similarly about Bucky, where like his trauma now, if his Enneagram type were to change after that, would definitely, I could see the 8 in there. But for me, looking at who he was before undergoing all of that, I think fall over closer on that 2-3 side of the spectrum. I definitely see your points about the wing 1. I could really see him being a 2-wing 3 or a 3-wing 2. And I think I like the idea of any of these characters, of Steve being maybe an atypical example of an 8. And not that he's any less valid of an 8, just that he's not what we maybe think of when we think of an 8. And similarly, I could see Bucky as somebody who, as a 2 or a 3, isn't maybe who you'd think of as a 2, but could still have some of those core motivations. And even when you said, when Steve does finally become Captain America, James, I guess that's his proper name, Bucky doesn't know what his place is anymore. He understands his place in their relationship as the protector, as the bigger guy, as the one who takes care of Steve. And once Steve is the one taking care of him, he doesn't quite know how to adjust. And I think that's because in his life, he's used to taking care of the people around him instead of being the one taken care of, if that makes sense. And I think that's really common for 2s who aren't always great at accepting or taking help from others.
I think he's a little disoriented, but I don't think it like rocks into his core. You know what I mean? Like I think he's just like, oh, you're big now. Like, okay, it's just okay. Like I don't know what to do necessarily at this moment, but I do not think a proper 2, if I can say so. So I think he might have a wing 2, would let Cap do all he does for him. I think it'd be way harder for him to let that happen. And it's complicated because I think maybe we should really break this into like Bucky versus the Winter Soldier. But I think that even if you were a 2, I think that Cap puts a lot on the line for him. And also, especially Bucky knowing what he did to Iron Man, I don't think he could have sat with that if he were a 2. So I will stick. I'd much rather compromise on the 3 because I think that's one of the biggest. Well, that's one of the main reasons I don't really love Civil War is almost my favorite movie, but that seems like a big plot hole to me that they would have kept that from Tony, that Bucky killed his parents, and while he was the Winter Soldier and under hypnosis. But I just think that wasn't correct. Like that wasn't correct, and I know a 2 would be like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
I don't know.
Away, here, nice to meet you. I accidentally I don't know if they tell him, but I think they wouldn't let all of that destruction happen, knowing what they knew.
I actually feel like we see in Civil War more than in Winter Soldier, but in both movies, Bucky has a lot of pushback to Steve trying to save him. He does not want to be saved. He wants to be on his own. He isolates himself. He just wants to buy his plums and live his life away from Steve because of that deep remorse and guilt that he feels. And when Steve is trying to save him in his apartment, he is running away from Steve as much as he's running away from the people trying to take him in. And so I think we actually do get to see a lot of pushback
I think we see pushback. I think that's fine. I just don't think we see him doing what I would categorize as like the thing that would serve the most people. So I think that's what a 2 would want to do. I was more responding
to when you said that Bucky wouldn't let Steve take care of him or wouldn't let Steve help him. But I actually think we see a lot of Bucky not wanting Steve's help and not wanting to be the person. It's
interesting. I don't know the source of that though. It's hard. I think that's where I'm kind of like, ooh, I just felt like he just didn't want it. I don't think he didn't want help, and he didn't. I think a 2 probably would have turned themselves in. Like I don't know, and or just figured something. I don't know. It just doesn't feel other serving, and I know that's just such a thing about twos. So, and even the running away from Steve, it was more, and I thought this was the 8 thing. That was one of the pieces, is that he more so, it was a pride thing more than it was, which is also very 3. That's like very 3. So
actually,
I think we can land on
oh my
the
God.
3.
I'm sorry. I did not mean to actually you, but according to like The Road Back to You, which is a book that I know we reference a lot, pride is the deadly sin of the 2.
It's a different type of pride, because it also is of the 3, is it not?
No.
What is it of the
3 is deadly sin, quote unquote, according to The Road Back to You, is deceit. And it talks a little bit about how they project false images and false senses of themselves onto the people around them to deceive them or to give a false impression of who they are. And I actually think that's very antithetical to what Bucky is and what he wants, especially as somebody who's been robbed of his own identity. I think all he wants is a sense of his own identity, and he doesn't want to misrepresent himself or be seen as false or inauthentic in terms of being the 3. I think that's where I bounce off of the 3, but I think that we are somewhere on that line between a 2 and a 3.
I know. I just really don't think I could sit with a 2. I think I'm gonna Peggy Carter this, look you in the eye, and stand on my tree-like legs or whatever she says, and say, no, you move, because I think he's a 3, and I think I could. The 3 is the compromise I'm willing to make of the 8. 2 is not.
Okay. Well, I think then it's a great time for us to turn to our third and final character, which is Cap's trusty sidekick. I know we talked last time about how even though there are no sidekicks in the Avengers, somehow Cap and Iron Man both end up with trusty black male sidekicks. But I do love Falcon, and I'm excited to get into that. So we are going to be discussing Sam Wilson, a.k.a. Falcon. And the little fun fact I have for him before we get into this discussion is that Anthony Mackie, he wanted to be in a comic book movie so bad. He emailed Marvel over and over and over again, and he just kept sending them emails. They kept saying, we will get back to you in due time. And eventually they did, and Kevin Feige, the producer who kind of oversees all of the MCU, offered him the role of Falcon, which he was like, I just literally want to be in any character that was in a comic book, and to be able to be in Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and then the future Avengers movies, and to get his own TV show with the Winter Soldier coming out soon, hopefully. He, I think, got very lucky, and I'm very excited to have him.
Oh, so am I. He's a great character. And another fun thing, just to my comic book past, is he was originally written as a mutant, and I like remember us watching this, Lucas, and the first time he puts on his metal wings and he like can do it perfectly. And I remember being like, well, okay. Well, you're telling me that guy's not a mutant. Like, he wasn't meant to fly and talk to birds. Like, come on, guys. But I love that about him, and I think he's a great guy. Lucas, I want to hear yours first. Are you ready? Could you share yours first again?
Yes.
I
Okay, so this is maybe one of the reasons that I fought so hard for Bucky to be a 2-wing 3 is because I have a strong sense that Sam is a 3-wing 2. And I really like that little like reflection of Cap's 2 best friends and like what that means for them as a dynamic duo. And so I kind of fell on him as a 3-wing 2. Do you want me to get a little bit more into that?
Yes, please.
Yes. So it's funny because as you talk about Bucky being like charismatic and the ladies' man and things like that, those are some of the first things that come to mind when I think of Sam. He is the cool guy. He has always kind of just been the popular one at the party. He knows how to win over a crowd, in my opinion, and not that he's ever on like a large stage, but he just feels like the one that you want to hang out with. And so to me, I see a lot of the 3 in him, just in terms of his charisma, his personality, even how outgoing he is to kind of be joking with Cap the first time they meet as they're running around the reflection pool at the Washington Monument and keep saying, don't say it, don't say on your left. And This is Captain America. This is like a big celebrity that he is just joking around with the first time that they've ever talked. And he's giving him music recommendations to listen to help get acclimated to the new world.
Marvin Gaye, 1972 Trouble Man soundtrack. Everything you missed, jammed into one album.
I'll put it on the list.
And I just really like that kind of easy confidence that he has about him. When I look at the wing and the wing 2 for me, as opposed to the 4, is that I don't think Sam has all of the kind of melancholy that I think 4s can kind of be known for. And I think both Bucky and Cap have more kind of melancholy and in their feels moments than we see from Sam.
Wait a second. I hate to interrupt. Is Bucky a 4?
Okay. I think a case can also be made for Cap to be a 4, but
I think, we have to redo the episode. I'm just kidding, listeners. However,
talk to me about Bucky as a 4.
Okay, the moodiness, the outfits, the I'm different than everyone else. I think here's the deal. I think both Captain America and Winter Soldier are different people than Steve Rogers and Bucky. Like, they went through that 100-year gap, right? And so I think that's where it gets a little iffy. And I think post Hydra, Bucky has a lot of 4 qualities, and maybe we could find ground on the 4-wing 3 for Bucky. Because I'm a 4-wing 3. People never think of me as melancholy, but I am very emotional. I think I'm also quite protective, and I think my friends would say that I'm similar to how Bucky is. And I can't base this all off of one person, that being myself. But I think I could definitely see that fight, that yearning for justice, and being able to see the gray and how he is beforehand. And I just want you to stay safe. I know you want to fight in this battle, but I love you. I'm here for you. And we're so empathetic to their struggles. He's trying to help him find that way, and because he's very empathetic. And then of course the moodiness, I just can't get over what he's wearing at Tony's funeral. You're gonna tell me that boy is a 2? That's a 4 if I've ever seen one. I know we can't do this all on outfits, and 4s are so complex, and we are not just emo, but he happens to be emo, and I think he happens to be 4.
Okay. What I would say, and if this will get you to agree with me on the 2, because I do feel that empathy that you're talking about is exactly the empathy that I'm referencing when I see him as a 2. But I would say, if I had to, that Bucky Barnes, pre-Hydra, as a character growing up in the Bronx, was a 2-wing 3. If we look at Bucky almost as dying, quote unquote, and coming back as the Winter Soldier, I could definitely see the Winter Soldier as a 4. Maybe a 4-wing 3, maybe he just kind of jumped that gap. I would agree with you that if we look at them as separate characters, Bucky is not a 4, I don't think, but I do think that you could count the Winter Soldier as a 4. As a 4 myself, I also feel akin to Bucky, or to the Winter Soldier.
Not be a 4, honestly.
I kind of, and maybe this is me, I kind of could see him as a 4-wing 5 too, because the Winter Soldier himself is not super, maybe extroverted, outgoing,
I think
definitely
we might
lives
change
in
our
his
minds
head
once
more.
the TV show comes to, because we haven't
That's
really gotten
true,
the
too.
opportunity. Because I also could totally see him when he's in Wakanda being the 4-wing 3 flirt. We just don't actually see that much footage of that.
Right, no, totally. And I think that that's a great point that we even talked about with Rhodey last time, is that sometimes these characters just have not had enough time to be fleshed out. And so there's so much that we can read into it.
Yes,
there's so much of ourselves that we can bring to it.
I'm committing to... why can't we meet at the 3 and then you could have different wings at different parts of his life?
Okay. You know what? When you phrase it like that, I'm here for it. I'm here for the 3-wing 2 and then becoming a 3-wing 4.
Thank you so much.
Ooh, something about that just clicked. Yes, I love it. Okay.
I love it too. Okay,
now,
also,
yes.
Speaking back to Falcon.
Yes.
I agreed with everything you said. That is exactly where I put him. I think he's a 3. I think he's calm, cool, collective. I think he's used to being the coolest person in the room. I think Rhodey probably also had that
100%.
issue. And then now all of a sudden he's with the Avengers and he's like, oh, I am a sidekick. Like, okay, I don't know what to do.
Yes, like that scene in Age of Ultron when he's trying to make the joke and none of the Avengers laugh at the joke, but then all the normal people do. That's Rhodey, but
that's
like
Rhodey, but it's like very similar. And I think both of them kind of have that like weird, like secondhand complex. Because I think the other thing about Avengers mostly, except for I'm speaking off the cuff. Well, and Thor, Iron Man and Thor. They also like they went through something to get their power. You know, that's a superhero story. Like you're normal and then you're not. And I think the Avengers all are just like have that like solace in each other in that superhero arc where the like sidekicks are like, no, I've always been the coolest dude in school, class clown, like he's super confident. He's such a 3 to me. It's like not even funny.
Definitely class clown. And I think that I really like if instead of them being, if Sam and Bucky are not like my initial 2-wing 3, 3-wing 2 pair, I like seeing them, especially Bucky now as the Winter Soldier, being a 3-wing 2 on Sam's side and a 3-wing 4 on Bucky's side. And I also think that their similarities are what make them butt heads so much.
Yes,
I love in Civil War when they're fighting Spider-Man and they're talking about how much they dislike each other. And then when Cap is kissing Sharon just so that nobody freaks out and thinks that he's in love with Bucky, even though he is, that's a different conversation.
Okay.
They're asking if they can move the seat up and they're like, no, they fight kind of like brothers. And I think that maybe it's that shared 3 that make them, so at odds sometimes.
For sure. And the other thing I want to say, I think that's important is that weird fourth sense for like the drama that I think Bucky has at the end for the sentimental at the end of Endgame.
Yes.
Where Bucky, like, I don't know if they talked about it, like we don't get to see that, but I think just oftentimes I think it might have even been Bucky's idea for Cap to go back. And if, like, I don't know, I could totally see that relationship. So my lifelong best friend is a 1. I've talked about her many times on this podcast. I'm a 4. And I can totally see her, like, me, like, saying, you know what, this is, like, the next step. This needs to happen. And sometimes I think with both 8s and 1s, you need to give them permission to do those little things that are for themselves because they're so justice oriented and black and white. And I like to think that there was a moment that happened, and I think that's Bucky's sentimental piece coming out and saying you can kind of in the same way that Pepper tells Tony you can rest now, that maybe someone gave him that permission. And to make Falcon the character. And he's just such a 3. He is not a wing 4. Like, he's not until he's like, oh, that was really cute. Like, I didn't plan. Like, you know what I mean? He's like such a, like, yes. You know, like a frat guy. Like, I love him. Like, with a great heart.
Yes. No, very much so, though. I think that almost frat guy energy, one of the guys, he has that in a really healthy way. And I actually really love, too, he does lead those support groups for veterans with PTSD. And I think that you see his wing 2 there as well, where he is taking his own experiences and his own past traumas of losing his friend in their deployment. And he takes that, and instead of kind of sitting in that himself, he's the one leading the group. He's not the one sitting in the group. He's the one leading it and helping other people instead. And so I do think that we see a lot of that 2-wing in there too.
I love it. I think we're totally right. That's the first one we've aligned on. Good for us.
And you know what I love about this is that Steve, if I'm going with my theory that Bucky was a 3-wing 2 before he went into the ice or went under Hydra, then Steve's best friends, when he first met them, were both 3-wing 2s. And I like to believe that there was something in that kinship that drew him to both Bucky.
Oh, you mean he just replaced him? Because I think that's exactly what happened. And that's why I thought they were, like, I'm totally okay with that. I'm totally aligned. I'm totally aligned to the fact that they're both 3s. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Cool. Wait, this is so fascinating because Tony, his 2 people were both 1s.
That is interesting. I just want to be in the room where it happens because I wonder if writers write to their own experiences, and just are like, oh,
right.
my good friend, like, oh, I picture this person being this way. And because, they have like characters because of the comics, but what part of the character you get to see it? Because as we're talking about, you do see those side characters so little, honestly. And I wonder if or if they identify with the one themselves and they happen to write all the people around the one main character as themselves. I'm curious how it works, but it's awesome.
Yes, I'd love see the room where it happens. One more Hamilton reference before we go. We just have to get it in there.
Guys. I did not mean to.
I love it. I love
it too. All right, Lucas, this was so much fun. Okay, so if you want to follow us on our socials, we're at Typecasting Pod on Twitter and on Instagram. And if you want to email us, you know what? Just to say, hey, we love you, or we made a few very simple mistakes, you don't have to let us know, but if you want to, typecastingpod@gmail.com. Why don't you tell them about our personals?
Yes, so if you want to find Murjanatu or I and get in touch, you can find Murjanatu on Twitter at Murjana, 2_, or on Instagram at Murjana, 2. No underscore. And for me, if you want to find more of my work or any of my socials or just get in touch, you can head to lucasgraydon.com. Remember to head to your favorite podcast app and leave us a nice review. And we cannot wait for next week. Thank you so much, Murjanatu. I had so much fun.
I had so much fun. I love you.
Love you too. Bye.
Bye.